Welcome to Yin and Young. The following is a story taken from Chapter 2. I have called it Playing Alone. I hope you enjoy it. The circle of Bobby's world was much smaller than Yinlin's. There was no school for children his age, so Bobby's world was defined by events at home, where Bobby was the sentinel in charge of watching the door. He was very good at that. Not only so, but Bobby also learned how to phone the police, in case something happens. Under the black phone in his mom and dad's bedroom was a piece of paper, and on that paper was a phone number. Bobby was expected to be able to call that number, and to ensure his success, Bobby's mother made him practice dialing. It was hard turning the dial. His little fingers could easily dial the 1, 2, and 3. But it was harder turning the dial for the larger numbers. 0 was especially difficult and needed extra fingers to push against the spring that returns the rotary back to its original position and hold the phone in place at the same time. Under his mother's supervision and with her encouragement, he read the paper himself and dialed all the numbers. The phone started ringing. "Give to Mummy, let me listen." She took the receiver from Bobby and listened. Someone could be heard on the other side. Then his mother said, "Hello? Yes, sorry. My son just dialed the phone. It won't happen again." She hung up. At first, Bobby thought he did something wrong. Then she looked at him, smiling, and said, "Good job, Bobby. You did it. You read the numbers, and you dialed them properly, you see? You can do it." Bobby felt comforted that he was capable. "So I phone the police if something bad happens," Bobby said, looking up at his mom. "Yes, but don't worry about it. Maybe you will never need to use this number, but you know where it is and you know how to dial it. If you want to practice dialing, you can turn the dial without taking the phone off the cradle, you see? Just leave the phone here and dial like this, and nothing will happen, but if you really need to phone someone, you take the phone off the hook like this." Bobby showed he understood, and many times after that he practiced dialing the numbers. "Okay, you go play." He was 3 years old at the time. It never occurred to Bobby to wonder why he should check the door, or learn to dial the police. He was simply happy to be given responsibilities. It would be many months later when he learned the context of his responsibilities. It was a gray mid-November morning. Bobby was in the basement looking for something to do while his mother washed clothes. The lights were on, and everywhere the house was cool. Along the far concrete wall was Bobby's bouncy horse. It was mounted on a metal frame with tight springs attached to either side. He had this toy since his first birthday, but it took several years before he was able to climb onto it, which, because of the springs, was a shaky and effortful ordeal. Once he learned to mount the horse, he was able to rock it back and forth in deep, springy dips and bows. It was tippy and took effort, but there was some pleasure in the gentle swaying that this toy provided once he was squarely in the saddle. His pleasure in the horse lasted only for a time. Today he was uninterested, and he continued to explore. Bobby walked toward the metal shelf against the wall next to the wash machine. Standing on his toes and scanning the shelf, he spied the wooden decorative cats his grandfather had sent several Christmases ago. He reached out and grabbed them, running his fingers over their smooth surfaces and the artificial gemstone eyes. Their lacquer taste he recalled from his baby days as an unpleasant memory, and his memory combined with their hardness made the cats unfriendly to him. It annoyed him that the cats were all connected together by their leather tails. In general, they didn't make good playthings, and in fact, they were designed as tabletop decorations, not toys for toddlers. He soon lost interest. He stopped to look at the rubber boots his grandfather had also sent. "Those boots don't fit," Bobby's mother said. She complained out loud that they were pink and that her father didn't seem to remember that her son was a boy, not a girl. It was not just family, but the larger world often reinforced this identity confusion. Bobby and his mother would be grocery shopping, for example, and someone stopping by looked at Bobby and wondered what a cute girl he was, until his mother corrected, "Thank you, he's a boy." "A boy? Oh dear, I didn't see that. Maybe he should be a girl, eh? It's hard to know when boys have their hair so long these days, isn't it?" In the stockroom somewhere a radio was playing. The Beatles could be heard singing, "She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah." His mother turned to ignore the fellow shopper. Bobby could tell when his mother was unhappy. She didn't like the comments the lady made in the grocery store, and she was also annoyed with Grandpa. But when she was unhappy with these people, it felt as if she was unhappy with Bobby at the same time. He didn't want to hear any more, so he left the boots alone and wandered back to his toy horse, where he ran his hand on the plastic surface. The toy horse was firm, but not exactly hard. There was a cool fleshiness to the horse, and he let his hands flow along the smooth plastic mane, then the raised front leg of the horse, over the hoof, following the shape with his finger, and back to the brown saddle, all the way back to the extended tail. While he explored the horse this way, he watched his mother fill a bucket of soapy water in the big sink. Leaving the bucket there, she grabbed the clothes basket and told Bobby to come upstairs with her. Once upstairs, Bobby was able to clamber into his toy Jaguar, where he played while his mother went outside. After hanging the laundry, Bobby's mother went downstairs to grab the water bucket, which she brought and placed on the kitchen floor. It was still steaming and had lots of bubbles which slipped down the side of the bucket. She intended to wash something, perhaps the floor, but she sat down at the kitchen table instead. After a few moments she told Bobby she was not feeling well and would lie down for a little sleep. She disappeared out the kitchen. The morning sun, which was just peeking through the window, filled the kitchen with the promise of a brilliant day. While keeping the cold air outside, the window allowed the sun to warm the room and remove the chill from the walls and floor. The house became noticeably silent. Bobby was not accustomed to his mother taking a nap so early in the morning. He sat in his Jaguar. It appeared as if he was investigating the side of the car from his position sitting in the driver's seat, but actually his attention was drifting. His mind, normally full with the noise of car sounds, air brakes from trucks, and the stop-and-go of street-like traffic, was silent now, as Bobby's mind seemed to float. The floor creaked, and sound, all the way to the kitchen ceiling, seemed absent. In the silence, Bobby ran his hands along the hard plastic of the red Jaguar, just as he did with the horse. Behind his seat there was a little trunk which could be forced open to store small items. He snapped the trunk shut. "Ouch," he said quietly, pinching his finger as he did so. He turned from the trunk, sat straight, and let his eyes wander to the bucket of soapy water, and watched as a large clump of bubbles, having now slid down the side of the bucket, had come to rest on the floor, glistening white. Bobby got out of his Jaguar and approached the bucket. He heard the quiet sound of bubbles popping like the patter of small ice crystals falling from the sky. He reached his hand out and felt their soft resistance, which was more welcoming than the hardness of the decorative cats. These bubbles smelled fresh, and they jiggled when Bobby bumped into the bucket. He scooped a small amount with his hand and sat on the floor, spreading the suds in an arc around him. Rubbing back and forth, he felt how smooth the floor was. Curious, he got up and reached down deeper into the bucket to touch the water and found that there were far more bubbles than water. He felt a coolness on his foot. As he leaned with one hand on each side of the bucket, he looked down at his foot and saw that his sock was all wet. He didn't like the wet sock feeling. Sitting down again, he pulled off his socks and returned to the bucket, with one foot on dry floor and one foot on bubbles. The feeling that struck him as his foot contacted the soapy surface was unspeakable. He rubbed his foot back and forth. Smooth, soft, like downy baby kitten fur, and no friction at all. This sensation entered through his foot into his entire body. Life itself was smooth, and it smelled wonderful like flowers. He reached into the bucket, scooped out more bubbles, and put them on the floor. Now he slid on both feet. "I'm skating," he thought, as he found himself immersed in the experience of no friction, no resistance. Over and over again he repeated his foot-sliding motions in pure delight. He was floating, dreaming, marveling at the pleasure he discovered on this ordinary day. With little conscious awareness, Bobby moved around to the back side of the bucket, and placing his hands on the rim, pushed it over. With a sudden release, all the water and bubbles spread across the kitchen floor, creating a harbor of soapy islands. He moved out into the center of the floor, sliding his feet this way and that, first on this pile of bubbles, then sliding from there to another pile of bubbles. He was totally detached from the familiar world of hard, edgy, and bad-tasting surfaces into this strange, slidey world of soft suds. Bobby soon slipped and fell. He turned on all fours, now wet and slippery, and worked himself back up onto his feet, where he continued to swish his feet back and forth. Light through the kitchen window brought a rainbow of color to the bubbles, affirming the gentle sweetness of life. This is what angel life must be like. Of course, he never said or thought these words. He simply felt it, felt the experience through his entire body. It is hard to say how long this lasted. Was it minutes? Had an hour passed? Bobby had entered eternity, knowing and experiencing only bliss. "What's going on here?" His mother's voice suddenly burst through the heavens in judgment. "What a mess!" Anger broke through the bubbles, and seeing her, Bobby slipped and fell, looking up. She stared hard at him. "What are you doing?" Her angry look demanded an answer. Blinking, he looked up and replied, "Skating," suddenly aware that the veil to the curtain had been torn, and the glory of God left the temple. He was in a kitchen, with an angry mother. His clothes were wet, and the floor was cold. "Didn't I tell you I'm not feeling very well?" she half shouted. "Get out of here! I need to clean this mess up." Bobby went into the living room and climbed onto the couch. Inside, he felt as if razors had cut him. Beauty had abandoned him and was replaced with searing pain and loneliness. "Not with your wet clothes!" she shouted. She disappeared into his room and came back with a little dry shirt, pants, underwear, and socks. She removed his wet clothes roughly. He didn't say a word, but she did. "Didn't Mummy tell you she's not feeling well? I need you to behave. This is too much work for me when I need to lay down." These words and others like them came out of her mouth, each one causing him to bleed inside. He wanted to hide. Once in dry clothes, Bobby climbed onto the couch. He lay there with his arm hanging down. Sadness became his home. He listened as his mother made suppressed, angry sounds in the other room. She shouted, "You know this might ruin the floor." What if Mummy didn't wake up? Oh, I feel so sick and I'm climbing around on the floor mopping up this mess. The volume of her complaints lowered, and it sounded more as if she were talking to herself than Bobby. By this time, Bobby was only half paying attention. He looked at the threads of the couch he was laying on as they wrapped around the piping along the edges of the cushion. He then looked out to the floor where he saw his ESO cards in a pile. These cards were similar to baseball or hockey cards, but the main character on each card was a car. One card had a yellow Mustang on it, another had a red Laurentian. There was a black Corvair like the one his mother drove. Various cars of one sort and another. They were not photorealistic, but close enough to seem like the real thing. Bobby's father collected these cards from the gas station attendants in little silver and blue packets every time he filled with gas. Whenever his father showed up, he would nearly always have another packet or two of cards to pass on to Bobby. Because the pictures were randomly distributed, Bobby had 2, 3, or 4 copies of several cars. The cards were collectibles and even had plastic holders for storing them, but Bobby used the cards to play a memory game. Bobby, drawn by the pile laying on the floor, got off the couch and lined up his cards row by row, upside down, and then turning the cards one by one, he tried to remember if other cards of the same make and model of car had been turned over recently. If he found a match, he paired the cards together and put them in a discard pile. Bobby wondered why his father hadn't given him any cards recently, and when he would be home again. Bobby got hungry. He was afraid to bother his mother, who had gone back to bed. He stood with the spare room door to his left, facing the open silence of his mum and dad's bedroom. In a quiet voice, he said, "I'm hungry." Silence. He stood for a while, looking through the bedroom door, observing the bare gray walls, and said it again. "Mommy, I'm hungry." Somewhere in the house, a clock could be heard ticking. "Mommy." There was a prolonged silence. His mother's voice came out of the silence. "Bobby, I can't get up now. Take the Cheerios out of the cupboard. You can eat those." Bobby turned to the kitchen and found the Cheerios, which he grabbed with both hands. The box was big compared to his small body, and he had to reach deep inside to get the cereal. It was a big reach, and to make things easier, he lifted the box and poured the cereal onto the couch. Climbing onto the couch, he was able to pick one, then another Cheerio with his fingers and put them in his mouth. They tasted good, and time passed as he chewed and swallowed, one after another little round circle. The house grew silent again, and the afternoon was marked by the slow movement of shadows cast in the living room. Bobby found things to occupy himself, then grew sleepy. The late afternoon darkness and silence of the house, the ticking of the clock, all had a soporific effect on Bobby, who climbed the couch and fell asleep awkwardly with one arm folded under his chest. The house, the place which had once glowed with the radiance of heaven, was now motionless and cool. Sometime during his nap a blanket appeared on his now comfortably adjusted body, and a pillow softened the weight on his head. The curtains had been drawn over the windows, through which the gray snow could be seen on the inactive neighborhood street. The living room lamp was turned on dim, and did little to illuminate the dark corners of the room. Bobby opened his eyes. His body had been moved so that from his spot on the couch he could see his mother cooking supper through the kitchen entrance. He felt the softness and warmth of his pillow and blanket. The sounds and smells of frying onions and hamburger spread its warm aroma into the living room. Potatoes were on the stove. It seemed that everything was better again. Normal. His mother looked all right. Hearing some noise from the living room, Bobby's mother declared, "Dinner will be ready soon, Bobby. Go to the bathroom and wash your hands, then you can sit up." Bobby's mother started placing dishes, and soon they were at the table eating. Bobby's mother mashed his potatoes for him and put butter on. As she did so, she explained to Bobby, "I need to tell you something, Bobby. Can you listen to me?" Bobby swallowed the yummy hamburger and nodded his head. "Your mommy didn't feel well today, but it's not your fault. I feel better now, but you should also know that Mommy can't always watch you. Sometimes I get sick, like today. When I'm sleeping in the bed, you just need to play with your toys. I don't want to see things like the spilled water on the floor again." Bobby nodded his head, but didn't understand why his mummy would be sick sometimes. As most children do, Bobby took the world at face value, and if he didn't understand it, he accepted it. Everything was okay now, and he didn't need to worry. Playing alone was not unusual for him.